A struggling mother spends her very last dollars to buy her little boy a pair of sneakers. But what happens next shocks her to the core. The gruff old store owner secretly slips money into the box, giving them hope when they need it most. But just as kindness sparks a bond, a dark photo from decades ago explodes online. The town turns on him. Windows are vandalized. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did this man hide a hateful past all these years? Buried records, sealed secrets, and a truth, powerful enough to destroy or heal a broken community. When mercy collides with judgment and a hidden past threatens to erase a lifetime of quiet kindness, will this mother and son uncover the truth in time to save him, or will the town's hate win again? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Maya Lewis sat at her small kitchen table early Saturday morning, the gentle spring sunlight streaming through the worn curtains. Her fingers trembled slightly as she counted the crumpled bills from her wallet for the third time. $28. That was all she had left until payday next Friday. Mom, are we going now?" Jaden bounced around the tiny kitchen, his worn sneakers making soft squeaking sounds against the linoleum floor. The holes in the sides had been patched with duct tape, a temporary fix that hadn't lasted long. Maya looked up at her son's eager face, his brown eyes sparkling with excitement. "Just give me one more minute, baby." She tried to keep her voice steady, though her stomach was in knots. "But you promised." Jaden's energy was contagious, even in her worried state. "Tommy said Whitaker Shoes has the cool ones with the stripes, just like what he got. And Coach said I need better shoes for track practice." Maya tucked the money carefully into her wallet. The worn leather was smooth from years of use, just like everything else they owned. She glanced at the stack of bills on the corner of the table. Electric, rent, groceries. Each one screamed for attention, but Jaden's feet couldn't wait. "Okay, let's go." She stood up, forcing a bright smile. "But remember what we talked about?" Jaden nodded solemnly, though he was still bouncing on his toes. "We have to stick to the budget. And no extra stuff, even if it's super cool." "That's right." Maya grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. "And what else? We get what fits, not what's fancy." Jaden recited the familiar rules, then broke into a grin. "But can I at least try on the ones with stripes, please?" Maya's heart squeezed. "We'll see what's in our price range, okay?" They walked the 6 blocks to Main Street, Jaden skipping ahead and then waiting for her to catch up. He chatted non-stop about his upcoming track meet, his shoes making sad, flapping sounds with every step. "Tommy says I could win if I had good shoes," Jaden said, falling back to walk beside her. "Coach Jones said the same thing. He said proper equipment is important." Maya reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're already amazing on the track, baby. New shoes or not." The bell above Whitaker Shoes tinkled as they pushed open the heavy glass door. The familiar smell of leather and rubber soles filled the air. Maya had been coming here since she was a child herself, when her own mother would save up for back-to-school shoes. Jaden immediately ran to the children's section, dropping to his knees in front of a display of athletic shoes. His eyes went wide at the array of colors and styles. "Good morning." A sales associate approached with a friendly smile. "Can I help you find anything?" "We're looking for running shoes," Maya said, her hand instinctively touching her wallet through her purse. "Something basic, but sturdy, for track." The associate nodded and knelt beside Jaden. "Well, young man, let's measure those feet and see what we've got in your size." Maya watched as they went through the measuring process, her heart racing as she saw the prices on some of the display shoes. $40, $50, $65. She swallowed hard. "Mom, these ones." Jaden pointed to a pair of simple black running shoes with white stripes. "They're just like Tommy's." The associate checked the size. "These would be perfect for track. They're our basic athletic model, but they're well made. Would you like to try them on?" Maya glanced at the price tag. $28. Her chest loosened slightly. "Yes, please." Jaden sat perfectly still as the associate helped him try on the shoes, a rare moment of calm for her energetic son. When he stood up, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "They feel so good." He took a few experimental steps, then broke into a jog around the display. "Mom, look, I'm so fast." "Walk, please," Maya reminded him, but she couldn't help smiling at his joy. The shoes did look good, simple but sturdy, with enough support for running. "They fit him perfectly," the associate said. "Would you like to add some socks? We have a special on athletic socks this week." Maya's smile faltered slightly. "Let me check the shoes first." She led Jayden to the counter, her steps heavy. The cashier rang up the shoes. $27.99. Maya pulled out her debit card, saying a silent prayer. "Would you like to add any socks today?" the cashier asked. "They're on sale, 3 pairs for $10. Jayden looked up at her hopefully. His current socks were all starting to get holes in the toes. "Let me." Maya swiped her card for the shoes first, holding her breath until the transaction went through. Then, with trembling fingers, she tried to add the socks. "Declined," flashed on the small screen. "I'm sorry," Maya said quickly, her cheeks burning. "We'll just take the shoes today." She could feel the cashier's eyes on her as she signed the receipt, could sense the mixture of sympathy and awkwardness that filled the space between them. Jayden's earlier excitement had dimmed slightly, though he still clutched the shoebox to his chest. "Thank you," Maya managed, taking Jayden's hand. She held it perhaps a little too tightly as they walked out of the store, the bell's cheerful tinkle seeming to mock her now. The morning sun was fully up as they stepped onto the sidewalk, but Maya barely noticed its warmth. She focused instead on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping her chin up, on not letting Jayden see the tears that threatened to spill over. Hank Whitaker stood at the back of his store, one hand resting on the polished oak shelf that had held shoes for over 4 decades. Through the front window, he watched Maya Lewis and her son disappear down the sidewalk, their shadows growing longer in the morning sun. His weathered face creased with concern. "Poor thing, couldn't even afford socks," he muttered, rubbing his chin where a small scar marked an old war wound. The store was quiet now, save for the gentle hum of the aging air conditioning unit. The morning light caught dust motes dancing in the air, reminding him of how many families had passed through these doors over the years. Some prosperous, some struggling, all needing good shoes for their children. Moving with the careful precision that came from years of handling footwear, Hank made his way to the register where Sarah, his part-time cashier, was straightening receipt paper. "Sarah, what size socks did that young man try on?" "Medium youth, Mr. Whitaker. The black athletic ones." Hank nodded, his joints creaking slightly as he bent to retrieve 3 pairs from the display under the counter. His fingers, thick and calloused from years of measuring feet and handling shoeboxes, carefully folded the socks into neat rectangles. "Going to take my break now," he announced, though Sarah was the only other person in the store. He picked up the Lewis receipt and studied it for a moment, memorizing the shoebox number. In the stockroom, Hank moved with surprising agility for his age, locating the exact model and size Jayden had purchased. The familiar scent of leather and cardboard brought back memories of his own father teaching him the trade, before everything had changed between them. He opened the box with careful hands, lifting the tissue paper that wrapped the new shoes. The black athletic shoes with their white stripes looked small and hopeful, nestled in their paper bed. Hank tucked the 3 pairs of socks alongside them, arranging everything so it looked untouched. But he wasn't finished. From his back pocket he pulled out his worn leather wallet. The edges were smooth from decades of use, not unlike Maya's. He counted out $40, 2 20s, crisp and new from his last bank visit. At his workbench, where he usually repaired shoes, Hank pulled out a sheet of paper from an old receipt pad. His handwriting was steady despite his age as he wrote, "For Jayden's next growth spurt. No return needed." He folded the note around the bills and slipped them into a plain white envelope from his desk drawer. The envelope went into the shoebox, tucked neatly beside the shoes where it would be found later. "Just a spring clearance special," he murmured to himself, carefully replacing the lid. It was the same excuse he'd used countless times over the years when helping families who reminded him of his own struggles long ago. The bell over the door chimed as a new customer entered the store. Hank heard Sarah's cheerful greeting and knew his time was short. He quickly carried the box to the front, setting it beside the register. "Sarah, Would you mind running this out to Miss Lewis? She left just a few minutes ago. Must have been a mix-up with the spring clearance special. Sarah looked at him with knowing eyes. She'd worked there long enough to understand his quiet acts of kindness. They're probably already home by now, Mr. Whitaker. Ah, well then. He patted the box gently. Just set it aside. I'll drop it by their place later. Back at their apartment, Maya helped Jayden untie his old shoes. The duct tape had finally given up, flapping loose from one side. She tried not to think about the socks they couldn't afford as she opened the new shoebox. "Mom, look!" Jayden's excited voice made her look closer. There, nestled beside the new shoes, were 3 pairs of black athletic socks, and beneath them, a plain white envelope. Maya's hands trembled as she opened it. 2 crisp $20 bills fell into her lap, along with a handwritten note. Her vision blurred as she read the simple message. For Jayden's next growth spurt, no return needed. The Sunday afternoon sun cast long shadows through the display windows of Whitaker shoes, creating patterns on the well-worn hardwood floors. Maya held the cold mason jar of sweet tea in both hands, while Jayden pushed open the heavy glass door, making the brass bell above jingle cheerfully. The store felt different on a Sunday. Quieter, more peaceful. Usually closed on the Lord's Day, the closed sign hung prominently in the window, but light spilled from the back office where Hank did his weekly bookkeeping. "Mr. Whitaker?" Jayden called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty store. "We brought you something." Maya smiled at her son's enthusiasm. The tea had been his idea. He'd insisted on making it himself, carefully measuring the sugar and stirring until every crystal dissolved. She'd helped him pour it into her grandmother's old mason jar, the one with tiny flowers etched around the rim. Heavy footsteps preceded Hank's appearance from the back room. He wore a pressed white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and wire-rimmed reading glasses perched on his nose. His eyebrows rose in surprise at the unexpected visitors. "Well, now," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "Don't often get company on a Sunday." Jayden bounced forward, nearly causing Maya to spill the tea. "We made you sweet tea, to say thank you for the socks, and—" He glanced at his mother, suddenly unsure if he should mention the envelope. "And for your kindness," Maya finished smoothly, stepping forward. "We wanted to show our appreciation." A slight flush colored Hank's cheeks. He cleared his throat and gestured toward some chairs near the fitting area. "That's mighty thoughtful of you folks. Would you care to sit for a spell?" Maya noticed how he avoided directly acknowledging the gift he'd slipped into their bag. There was something endearing about his modesty, the way he seemed almost embarrassed by their gratitude. "We'd love to," she said, following him to the chairs. Jayden immediately climbed into one of the low-fitting stools, spinning it around with delight. "Careful there, young man," Hank cautioned, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. He disappeared briefly into the back room and returned with 3 paper cups. "Proper sweet tea deserves proper serving," he said, arranging the cups on a small side table. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the mason jar. "Let me help with that," Maya offered, noticing the tremor. She poured the amber liquid carefully into each cup, the sweet aroma filling the air. "Your new shoes working out all right?" Hank asked Jayden, settling into his chair with a slight grunt. "They're awesome!" Jayden exclaimed. "I can run super fast now. Watch!" He jumped up and sprinted to the end of the aisle and back, his new sneakers squeaking slightly on the floor. "Indoor feet, honey," Maya reminded him gently, but Hank waved off her concern. "Let the boy show off a bit. Nothing wrong with being proud of new shoes." He took a sip of tea, and his eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Now that's proper sweet tea, just like my mama used to make." They fell into easy conversation, with Jayden chattering about school and his upcoming track meet. Maya noticed how Hank listened intently to her son, asking questions and nodding seriously at all the right moments. It wasn't the practiced attention of someone humoring a child, but genuine interest. "The other kids noticed my new shoes right away," Jayden was saying. "Tommy said they were cool, and he never says anything is cool." Hank chuckled, reaching for his tea again. "Well, that's quite the endorsement." But as he lifted the cup, something changed in his expression. His face went pale, and the cup wavered in his hand. Maya recognized the signs immediately. She'd seen them often enough in her work at the nursing home. She was on her feet in an instant, steadying both Hank and the cup before either could fall. "Mr. Whitaker, I need you to take some deep breaths for me," she said, her voice shifting automatically into what her colleagues called her nurse mode, calm, authoritative, but gentle. She guided him to sit back in his chair, one hand on his shoulder, the other checking his pulse at his wrist. Jaden stood frozen, his eyes wide with concern. "Is Mr. Whitaker okay?" "He's just a little dizzy, baby," Maya assured him, though she kept her attention on Hank. "Would you go get the water bottle from my purse?" The boy darted to retrieve it while Maya continued monitoring Hank's pulse. It was rapid but steady. His color was already starting to improve, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "When did you last eat something, Mr. Whitaker?" Hank blinked, seeming embarrassed by the attention. "Been doing the books since church let out. Might have forgotten lunch." "Here's the water," Jaden said, returning with the bottle. He handed it to Maya with the serious expression of a junior medical assistant. Maya cracked open the bottle and handed it to Hank. "Small sips, please, and after this, we're going to need to get some food in you. No arguments." A ghost of a smile crossed Hank's face. "Yes, ma'am." He took careful sips of water while Maya kept her fingers on his pulse, counting silently. Jaden moved closer, placing his small hand on Hank's arm. "My mom's real good at taking care of people," he said with complete confidence. "She works at Oak Ridge Home and knows everything about making people feel better." "Is that right?" Hank's voice was stronger now, some color returning to his face. He glanced at Maya with new respect. "Well, I believe it. Got steady hands, just like a good nurse should." Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sweet tea. She kept her professional demeanor, but inside she was touched by both Jaden's pride and Hank's acknowledgement. "Your pulse is evening out," she said, finally releasing his wrist. "But you really should eat something. Do you have any snacks in the back?" "Got some crackers in my office," Hank admitted. "For when I work through lunch, which I'm not supposed to do. Doctor's orders." "And yet, here we are," Maya said, raising an eyebrow. She recognized the stubborn independence of someone used to taking care of themselves. She saw it often enough in the mirror. Monday morning brought a chill that made Maya pull her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. She guided Jaden up the concrete steps of Franklin Elementary, his new sneakers squeaking against each step. The shoes looked perfect on him, clean white with blue stripes, just like he wanted. "Remember to tie them tight before gym class," Maya reminded him, smoothing his collar. "I know, Mom." Jaden bounced on his toes, eager to show his friends. "Coach says we're doing track today." Maya's heart swelled at his excitement. "You'll be the fastest one out there." She bent down to hug him, breathing in the familiar scent of his watermelon shampoo. "Have a great day, baby." "Mom!" Jaden protested with an 8-year-old's embarrassment at public affection, but he hugged her back quickly before darting inside. The nursing home where Maya worked was only a 10-minute walk from the school. She enjoyed these quiet morning walks when the town was just waking up. Today, though, her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Whitaker, Hank, and how unsteady he'd looked yesterday. The way he'd gripped the counter, his face going pale. As a nurse's aide, she'd seen that look too many times to ignore it. At Riverside Gardens Care Center, Maya changed into her pale blue scrubs and started her morning rounds. Mrs. Peterson needed help with breakfast. Mr. Romano wanted to talk about his grandchildren again, and Mrs. Zhang required assistance with her physical therapy exercises. The morning passed in a blur of small kindnesses and routine tasks. During her break, Maya sat in the staff room with a cup of lukewarm coffee, scrolling through local news on her phone. A notification popped up from the Daily Chronicle, their town's news website. The reporter, Tessa Green, was known for her sharp investigative pieces that often stirred up controversy. Across town, in her small office at the Daily Chronicle, Tessa Green leaned back in her chair, cursor hovering over the post button. The black and white photograph on her screen showed a much younger Hank Whitaker standing near the edges of what was clearly a white supremacist rally. Confederate flags waved in the background, and signs with hateful messages were visible. The photo was dated 1972. Tessa had received the photo from an anonymous source last week, along with a tip about Hank's possible connections to hate groups in the past. She'd spent days verifying the photograph's authenticity and researching the context. The rally had indeed taken place in their county, and facial recognition software confirmed it was Hank Whitaker in the image. "This is news," Tessa muttered to herself, though something in her stomach twisted uncomfortably. She thought about Whitaker's shoes, how it had been a fixture on Main Street for decades. She'd bought her first pair of proper running shoes there when she was 16. Hank had spent nearly 20 minutes making sure they fit perfectly. But the public had a right to know, didn't they? If someone with ties to hate groups was still operating in their community, people should be aware. Especially now, when the town was becoming more diverse. Her finger clicked. Post. The article went live at 2:47 p.m. By 3:15 p.m. it had been shared over 200 times. Maya was finishing up her shift, helping Mrs. Peterson get comfortable in her favorite chair by the window, when her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket. Several of her friends had tagged her in the post, knowing she'd just been at Whitaker's shoes. "You take care now, Mrs. Peterson," Maya said, adjusting the elderly woman's blanket. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Such a good girl." Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "Always taking care of everyone." In the break room, Maya finally had a chance to check her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the article. The photograph filled her screen, grainy but clear enough. A young man, who was unmistakably Hank Whitaker, stood at the edge of a crowd. His face was serious, unsmiling. Behind him, the hateful signs and Confederate flags seemed to loom like dark clouds. The caption read, "Whitaker's shoes owner tied to hate." Maya sat heavily in the plastic chair, her mind spinning. She thought about Hank's gentle hands measuring Jaden's feet, the careful way he'd written that note and slipped money into their shoebox. She thought about his kind eyes when he'd asked about Jaden's running, and how he'd remembered their names even though they'd only been in once before. The comment section under the article was already filling up with angry responses. Some people were calling for a boycott. Others were sharing memories of times they'd felt uncomfortable in the store, reinterpreting past interactions through this new lens. Maya's thumb hovered over the share button, then moved away. Something about this didn't feel right. The photo was 50 years old. People could change in 50 years. She knew that better than most. Her own father had transformed from an angry, bitter man into someone who volunteered at homeless shelters every weekend, though she'd lost him before Jaden was born. But the evidence was right there in black and white. And in small towns like theirs, the past never stayed buried for long. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Eddie Thompson shuffled toward Whitaker's shoes for his usual coffee with Hank. The sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Harsh white letters screamed across the store's front window. "Close it down." The chalk marks looked fresh, probably from overnight. Eddie's arthritic fingers fumbled with his phone, trying to call Hank, when the old shopkeeper's pickup truck rattled into its usual parking spot. Hank stepped out slowly, his face tight as he took in the vandalism. "Don't touch it," Eddie warned as Hank reached for the door. "Might want photos for the police." Hank's shoulders slumped. "Won't do any good, Eddie. Things like this, they don't leave evidence." He pulled out his handkerchief and began wiping at the chalk. "Help me clean up before the morning crowd sees." But there was no morning crowd. As the hours ticked by, the usual stream of customers had dried to a trickle. The morning bell barely rang, and when it did, people just poked their heads in, whispered to each other, and left without buying anything. Around 10, Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door came in wringing her hands. "Hank, I saw on Facebook that awful photo. It can't be true, can it?" Hank just kept arranging the children's shoes display, his movements mechanical. "It was 50 years ago, Margaret. Things were different then." "But you're not explaining anything. People are saying such terrible things online." Mrs. Chen's voice cracked. "My daughters are asking if we should still do business with you." The old man's hands trembled as he set down a tiny pink sneaker. "You do what you need to, Margaret. I understand." By lunchtime, the chalk had been cleaned away, but the damage was done. The usually busy store sat empty except for Hank and Eddie, who refused to leave his friend alone. They sat in the back office, their coffee going cold. Across town at Riverside Manor Nursing Home, Maya's day wasn't going any better. She noticed the strange looks as soon as she arrived for her shift. The usual friendly greetings from her coworkers turned to whispers behind hands and quick glances away when she passed. During her morning rounds, Maya overheard snippets of conversation from the break room. "Can't believe she still shops there. Supporting that kind of person." Her stomach churned as she helped Mr. Roberts with his physical therapy. The elderly man seemed to sense her distraction. "Everything all right, dear? You seem somewhere else today." Maya forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, Mr. Roberts. Now, let's work on those leg exercises." But the whispers followed her. In the medication room, 2 nurses fell silent when she entered. At the front desk, the receptionist suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. The morning dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. When lunch finally came, Maya grabbed her brown paper bag and headed to the break room as usual. Through the doorway, she could see her regular lunch companions, Sarah, Jen, and Carmen, huddled at their usual table. They looked up as she entered, then quickly looked away. "Did you see those new pictures someone posted?" Carmen whispered, not quite quietly enough. "From other rallies back then?" "I can't believe she's defending racists," Sarah muttered. "Taking her kid there and everything." Maya's hands trembled as she turned away from the break room. She found herself in the empty physical therapy room, sitting alone with her untouched sandwich. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The phone in her pocket buzzed, another social media notification. She didn't dare look. Instead, she stared out the window at the spring flowers beginning to bloom in the nursing home's garden, wondering how something as simple as buying her son a pair of shoes had turned into this nightmare. The sound of approaching footsteps made her quickly wipe her eyes. She couldn't let them see her cry. She was Maya Lewis, single mother, professional, survivor. She'd weathered worse storms than this. But, as she sat there alone, her lunch growing warm, and her heart still racing, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was just beginning. Maya balanced the covered casserole dish in one arm as she knocked on Whitaker Shoes' back door. The evening air had turned chilly, and the alley behind the store was quiet, except for a distant dog barking. She'd left Jaden with Mrs. Rodriguez next door, promising to return quickly. After a long pause, she heard shuffling footsteps. The door opened just enough for Hank's weathered face to peer out. "You shouldn't be here," he said gruffly, though his eyes showed concern rather than anger. "People are talking enough as it is." "People can talk all they want." Maya lifted the dish. "But you need to eat. It's chicken and rice. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." Hank hesitated, then opened the door wider. The stockroom was dim, lit only by a single desk lamp. Boxes of shoes lined the metal shelves in neat rows, each labeled in Hank's precise handwriting. The smell of leather and polish hung in the air. "Kitchen's upstairs," he said, leading the way to a narrow staircase. "Watch that third step. It creaks something awful." The apartment above the store was small but tidy. A few framed photographs hung on the walls, mostly landscapes, nothing personal. The kitchen table was bare, except for yesterday's newspaper and a half-empty coffee cup. "You didn't have to do this," Hank said, as Maya set the dish down and began looking for plates in the cupboards. "Second drawer on the left," he added quietly. She found 2 plates and some silverware. "Have you eaten at all today?" Hank shrugged, lowering himself into a kitchen chair. "Lost my appetite somewhere between the window chalk and the phone calls." "They're wrong about you," Maya said firmly, serving the food. "Anyone who spent 5 minutes in your store knows that." "Do they?" Hank pushed the rice around his plate. "That picture. It's not what people think. But talking just makes it worse. Always has. How can staying silent help? The whole town is jumping to conclusions." "Let them jump." His voice was tired. "Truth is, I've carried this weight for 50 years. Maybe it's finally time to pay for it." Maya sat down across from him. "Pay for what? Being in a photograph?" Before Hank could answer, heavy footsteps thundered up the back stairs. A voice called out, "Hank? You up there?" "In here, Eddie," Hank replied, something in his posture relaxing slightly. Eddie Morales filled the kitchen doorway, his broad frame and military bearing unchanged despite his 74 years. He nodded to Maya. "Evening, miss. Good to see someone's making sure this old coot eats." "Sit down before you fall down," Hank muttered, but there was fondness in his tone. Maya rose to get another plate, but Eddie waved her off. "Already ate, but thanks. Just came by to tell this stubborn mule that he needs to speak up before things get worse." "Won't help," Hank said. "Like hell it won't." Eddie pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the linoleum. "You want me to tell her about Dong Ha? About Jackson?" Hank's fork clattered against his plate. "Eddie, she needs to know what kind of man you are." Eddie turned to Maya. "Vietnam, 1,970. We were pinned down outside Dong Ha. Charlie had us surrounded, and Jackson, one of our squad's 2 black Marines, took shrapnel in both legs." "Eddie, please." Hank's voice was barely a whisper, but Eddie pressed on. "Middle of the firefight this fool crawls out there. Bullets flying everywhere. Drags Jackson back behind the lines, using his own body as a shield. Stayed with him all the way to the med station, talking to him, keeping him conscious." Maya watched Hank's face. He stared down at his plate, shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. "Jackson made it," Eddie continued. "Has 6 grandkids now. Sends Hank a Christmas card every year. But this one?" He jerked a thumb at Hank. "Won't tell anyone. Won't defend himself. Just sits here letting people think the worst." "It was a long time ago," Hank said quietly. "And one good deed doesn't erase everything else." "One good deed?" Eddie's voice rose. "How about 40 years of giving away shoes to any kid who needs them? How about all those times you've stayed late measuring feet because a mother couldn't come during regular hours? How about—" "That's enough." Hank's tone was firm but gentle. "Please, Eddie." Maya looked between the 2 men. Eddie practically vibrating with protective anger, Hank withdrawn into himself. She thought about the socks in Jaden's shoebox, the careful way Hank had measured her son's feet, the $40 they hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "Why won't you tell people your side?" she asked softly. Hank was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like grief. "Because some stories aren't just mine to tell. And, talking about them, it can hurt people who've already been hurt enough." Eddie opened his mouth to argue, but something in Hank's expression made him stop. Instead, he reached over and squeezed his old friend's shoulder. They sat in silence as the evening deepened outside, 3 people connected by a simple meal and complicated truths, while somewhere in the town beyond, rumors continued to spread. The Saturday morning sun filtered through the dusty stockroom windows of Whitaker Shoes, casting long shadows between the towering shelves. Maya sat on an old wooden stool, listening intently as Eddie Morales shared stories from his and Hank's time in Vietnam. His weathered hands gestured as he spoke, his Marine Corps ring catching the light. "Hank never wanted recognition," Eddie said, adjusting his position against a shelf of work boots. "Not for anything. Man saved my hide more times than I can count, but you'd never hear him mention it." Jaden wandered between the narrow aisles, running his fingers along the shoeboxes. The 8-year-old had been bursting with energy all morning, and Maya had finally given up trying to make him sit still. "Be careful back there, sweetie," she called out, watching him disappear around a corner. Eddie smiled. "Let him explore. Hank won't mind. This place is like a treasure chest for kids. All sorts of old stuff tucked away." Maya nodded, though she couldn't help worrying. "You were saying about the night in Saigon?" "Right. So there we were, pinned down." Eddie continued his story, but was interrupted by a sudden crash from the back of the stockroom. "Jaden?" Maya called out, already on her feet. "I'm okay." His voice came back quickly. "But I knocked something over. Sorry." Maya and Eddie made their way to where Jaden stood beside a toppled stack of boxes. Old shoes had spilled across the floor, and beneath them lay a thick, leather-bound book. Its cover was worn smooth with age, the corners rounded from years of handling. "What's this?" Jaden picked it up before Maya could stop him. Dust puffed from its pages. Eddie stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. "Well, I haven't seen that thing in years. Hank's old ledger." Maya helped Jaden carefully open the cover. The pages were yellowed but well preserved, filled with neat columns of handwritten entries. At the top of the first page, in careful penmanship, was written, "Laces of Mercy, 1969. Look, Mama," Jaden pointed to the entries. "It's got names and shoe sizes." Eddie pulled up another stool. This was Hank's special project. Never wanted anyone to know about it. Maya ran her finger down the columns. Each entry included a name, age, shoe size, and date. Some had little notes in the margins. Father lost job. House fire. Mother sick. Timothy Roberts, age 7. She read aloud. Brown Oxfords, size 3. December 1969. There was a small note beside it. Family new to town. Father injured at mill. The Roberts family. Eddie nodded. They're still here. Timothy's got grandkids now. They carefully turned the pages. Year after year, the lists continued. Maya noticed something else. Many of the names were clearly from families of color. Johnson, Washington, Rodriguez, Chen, Martinez. Hank never cared about any of that, Eddie said quietly. If a kid needed shoes, they got shoes. Simple as that. Jaden pointed to an entry from 1975. Look, this one says, "Whole family needed shoes after flood." And here's another one. 3 kids, no winter boots. Maya felt her throat tighten as she recognized some of the family names. People who were now avoiding the store, believing the worst about its owner. The ledger told a different story. Decades of quiet generosity. Hundreds of children helped without fanfare or recognition. Why didn't he ever tell anyone? She asked. Eddie shook his head. That's not Hank's way. He always said true kindness doesn't need an audience. The morning light had shifted, creating new patterns on the stockroom floor, as they continued to page through the ledger. Each entry represented a story, a moment when Hank Whitaker had seen a need and quietly filled it. 1980, 2, 1990, 1998, Maya murmured, noting how the handwriting remained steady and precise through the years. The most recent entries were from just months ago. Some of these kids grew up to bring their own children here, Eddie said. Most never knew they were part of Laces of Mercy. Hank would just tell them there was a sale, or he'd found an extra pair in the back. Jaden sat cross-legged on the floor, still absorbed in the pages. Is that why he helped us, Mama? Are we in the book too? Maya turned to the latest entries, and there it was in Hank's neat script. Jaden Lewis, age 8, running shoes, size 4, Mother Maya, hard-working, proud. She quickly wiped her eyes, not wanting Jaden to see her tears. The simple entry, and the decades of similar entries before it, spoke volumes about the man everyone in town was now judging so harshly. There must be thousands of names here, she said softly. Eddie nodded. Thousands of pairs of shoes, thousands of kids who walked out of here standing a little taller. That's who Hank really is. Not whatever that old photograph might suggest. The ledger lay open between them, its pages telling a story that needed to be heard. Not just about shoes, but about quiet acts of kindness that had rippled through their community for generations. The wooden pews of First Community Church gleamed in the morning sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows. Maya sat near the back, her hands folded in her lap as the congregation filed out after service. Pastor Ruth's sermon about judgment and mercy had struck close to home, especially with everything happening at Whitaker Shoes. Maya watched as Pastor Ruth said goodbye to the last few parishioners. The older woman's silver hair caught the light, and her warm smile put everyone at ease. When the sanctuary emptied, Pastor Ruth made her way down the aisle and settled into the pew beside Maya. Heavy thoughts? Pastor Ruth asked gently. Maya nodded, twisting her purse strap. I just can't square it. The Hank I know with that awful photograph. He's been nothing but kind to me and Jaden. Pastor Ruth was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands smoothing her skirt. Sometimes the truth lies deeper than a single moment captured in time. She glanced around the empty church before continuing in a lower voice. I remember that summer, 1969. 972. I was fresh out of seminary then. Maya turned to face her fully. You were here? You remember what happened? There were whispers, Pastor Ruth said. Things that never made it into the papers. The courthouse kept certain records sealed, but word gets around in small towns. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Hank testified against his own father that year. Maya's breath caught. What? His father was mixed up with some very dangerous people, a white supremacist group trying to gain ground here. Pastor Ruth's voice carried the weight of old pain. Hank broke with them completely, stood up in court, and told the truth about what he'd seen, what his father had done. But why keep that secret? Maya asked. That would clear his name right now. The records were sealed to protect his sister, Lena. She was just 16 then. Pastor Ruth shook her head sadly. Those men, they didn't take kindly to what they saw as betrayal. Threats were made. The family split up. Lena went to live with their aunt in Tennessee until things cooled down. Maya sat back, trying to process this new information. The sunlight through the stained glass cast pools of blue and gold across the floor, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. Hank chose truth over family loyalty, Pastor Ruth continued. Chose what was right over what was easy. But it cost him dearly. He's carried that weight alone for decades. The ledger, Maya whispered, remembering the worn book filled with names. All those children he helped. His way of making amends, perhaps, for sins that weren't even his. Pastor Ruth placed a gentle hand on Maya's arm. But he never wanted recognition, never wanted to draw attention to any of it. Maya thought of Hank in his store, carefully measuring children's feet, slipping extra socks into bags when parents were struggling. The quiet dignity in how he carried himself, even now with chalk on his windows and whispers following him down Main Street. Sometimes silence isn't guilt, Pastor Ruth said softly. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's shame for things we couldn't prevent rather than things we did. Maya stood slowly, her mind whirling. The truth about Hank was so different from what everyone assumed, but how could she help without betraying his decades-long silence? The weight of this knowledge pressed on her heart, understanding now why he refused to defend himself, why he simply absorbed the town's anger with stoic resignation. What do I do with this? Maya asked, more to herself than Pastor Ruth. The pastor rose beside her. Truth has its own timing, dear, and its own way of coming to light. Maya gathered her purse, feeling the weight of this new understanding. Hank wasn't a man hiding hatred. He was a man who had stood against it at great personal cost. But in a world of quick judgments and viral posts, would anyone take the time to believe the real story? She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the empty sanctuary. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, and Maya felt caught between light and shadow herself, between knowing the truth and finding a way to honor it. Maya, Pastor Ruth called softly from behind her. Remember, mercy doesn't always wear the face we expect. Maya nodded, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. Outside, the spring air was warm and fresh, but her heart felt heavy with the complexity of it all. Hank's story deserved to be told, but she understood now why he had chosen silence. Some truths were too delicate, too deeply personal to shout from the rooftops. She walked down the church steps, each footfall matching the rhythm of her thoughts. The truth about Hank's past might not be what everyone thought, but in a town already divided by suspicion, would anyone be willing to look past that photograph to see the whole story? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach, like trying to catch one of those dust motes dancing in the sanctuary light. The Veterans Affairs Hall stood like a weathered sentinel on the edge of town, its brick facade mellowed by decades of sun and rain. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over linoleum floors and walls decorated with faded military photos and carefully preserved American flags. Maya hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering over the door handle. Eddie had called earlier, insisting she come hear something important. Through the window she could see a group of elderly men gathered around one of the circular tables, their white heads bent in conversation. The door creaked as she entered. Eddie looked up and waved her over, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. Maya, come meet some of Hank's old buddies. The veterans straightened in their chairs as Maya approached. Eddie made quick introductions. Jim Martinez, who walked with a cane. Thomas Washington, whose dark skin had grown ashen with age but whose eyes remained sharp and alert. And Bill Cooper, who still wore his Vietnam veteran cap with quiet pride. "Pull up a chair," Eddie said, sliding one out for her. "These fellas have some stories you need to hear." Maya sat down, noting how the men exchanged knowing looks. Thomas Washington cleared his throat first. "Eddie tells us you've been good to Hank," he said. "That means something to us. Especially now, with all this nonsense going around." Maya smoothed her nurse's scrubs self-consciously. "I know he's not what people are saying." "Course he ain't," Bill Cooper interrupted, his voice gruff with emotion. "That boy saved Tommy's life in '70, didn't he, Thomas?" Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze distant with memory. "We were in the thick of it. Monsoon season. I took shrapnel in both legs." He patted his right knee. "Still got some pieces in there. Couldn't walk. Hank carried me 1.5 miles through rice paddies under fire. Never even mentioned it in his reports," Eddie added. "Just wrote, 'Assisted wounded comrade to medical evacuation.'" Jim Martinez leaned forward, his cane tapping against the floor. "That's Hank all over. Never wanted credit for nothing. Remember when he found out some of us couldn't afford presents for our kids that Christmas in '73? The other veterans nodded, and Jim continued. "He shows up Christmas Eve with these boxes of toys. Said they were overstock from his daddy's store. Found out later he'd spent his own money, drove all the way to Cincinnati to get them." "And this was right after he'd testified?" Maya asked quietly. The room grew still. Eddie's face tightened. "You know about that?" "Pastor Ruth told me. About his father, the sealed records." Thomas shook his head slowly. "That took guts. Standing up to your own blood ain't easy. Especially back then. Especially here. Cost him everything," Bill added. "His daddy cut him off completely. Had to take loans to buy the shoe store from old man Wilson instead of inheriting his father's business like he was supposed to." Maya thought of Hank in his store, measuring children's feet with such careful attention. How many of those children had been from families who couldn't afford new shoes? How many secret acts of kindness had gone unrecorded, even in that worn ledger? Jim's cane tapped the floor again, drawing her attention. "You know what really gets me? All these folks acting like they know him from one old photo. They don't know how he helped integrate the Main Street Business Association in '75. Don't know how many times he's quietly paid for funeral expenses when veteran families came up short. Or the scholarship fund," Eddie added. $10,000 a year to the community college, designated for minority students. Never put his name on it." Thomas reached into his wallet and carefully extracted a yellowed photograph. He slid it across the table to Maya. It showed a much younger version of himself in uniform, arm around a grinning Hank Whitaker. Behind them, a group of soldiers of various races lounged together on sandbags. "That's our unit," Thomas said softly. "Back then, lot of white boys wouldn't bunk with us, wouldn't eat with us. Hank never saw color, said the only thing that mattered was who'd have your back when the bullets started flying." Maya studied the photo, noting the easy camaraderie in their poses, the genuine warmth in their smiles. It stood in stark contrast to that other photograph currently circulating online. "The thing about war," Bill said, his voice rough with emotion, "is it shows you who people really are, not who their daddy raised them to be, not what society tells them to be, but who they choose to be when it matters most." Eddie nodded. "Hank chose right, every time, even when it hurt him to do it." "But why won't he defend himself now?" Maya asked. "Why let people believe the worst?" The veterans exchanged glances again. Thomas spoke first. "Some wounds run too deep to explain. Sometimes the price of doing right is carrying the weight of what it cost you." "But that's not fair," Maya protested. "He deserves better than this." "Course he does," Eddie agreed. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Maya looked around the table at these men who had known Hank at his best and worst moments, who had seen his true character tested in ways most people never would. She thought of Jaden's proud smile in his new shoes, of the careful way Hank had measured his feet, of the quiet dignity with which he faced the town's current hatred. "I can't stay silent," she said finally, her voice growing stronger. Not when I know the truth. Not when my son looks up to him. Not when he's done so much good for so many people. The veterans straightened in their chairs, a familiar light of determination kindling in their eyes. These were men who understood taking stands, who knew the cost of standing up for what was right. Then you won't stand alone, Thomas said firmly, placing his hand on the table. One by one, the other veterans added their hands to his. Maya felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to resolve. She placed her hand atop theirs, feeling the strength of their shared purpose. These men had fought actual battles. Surely she could fight this one for Hank's reputation, for the truth, for justice. She stood up, smoothing her scrubs with steady hands. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me these stories, for helping me understand." "Thank you for listening," Eddie replied, rising to walk her out. "Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone willing to hear the whole truth, not just the easy parts." Maya stepped out into the evening air, her mind already forming plans. The truth about Hank Whitaker needed to be told, and she would make sure people heard it. Not just the part captured in that viral photograph, but all of it, the courage, the kindness, the quiet dignity of a man who had spent decades choosing right over easy. The VA hall stood solid behind her as she walked to her car, its lights glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Like those veterans inside, she had found her mission. Now it was time to act. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the First Methodist Church basement, where Darlene Price's quilting circle had gathered for their weekly meeting. The familiar whir of sewing machines and chatter usually filled the air, but today the machines sat silent as 12 women huddled around a table scattered with fabric scraps and half-empty coffee cups. "It's just not right," Darlene said, her round face flushed with conviction. She stood at the head of the table, her silver hair neatly styled despite the early hour. "We've all known Hank Whitaker for decades. Remember when he fitted all our children's shoes? Our grandchildren's?" Margaret Wilson, the oldest member at 84, nodded vigorously. "He spent 30 minutes with my Tommy's flat feet, ordered special inserts, didn't charge extra. And now, people are treating him like some kind of monster," Betty Chen added, setting down her coffee mug with a sharp clink. "My Joshua still wears the running shoes Hank helped pick out last spring." Darlene pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "We need to do something. Something big enough to make people stop and think." The basement door creaked open, and Maya stepped in, looking tired in her nurse's aide uniform. She'd gotten Darlene's text during her night shift. "Maya, honey, come sit." Darlene patted the empty chair beside her. "We were just talking about Hank." Maya sank into the offered seat, grateful for the coffee someone immediately pushed her way. "I just came from the VA hall last night. The stories those veterans told me about Hank. See?" Darlene looked around the table. "That's exactly what I mean. We need to get these stories out. Show people who Hank really is." Sarah Thompson, who'd been quietly stitching a binding, set down her needle. "What if we had some kind of event? Right there on the sidewalk in front of the store." "An event?" Several voices echoed. "Yes, like." Sarah's hands moved as she thought. "Like a celebration of all the good Hank's done." Darlene's eyes lit up. "We could call it Shoes of Mercy Day." After that, ledger Maya found. The energy in the room shifted as women began talking over each other with ideas. "We could bring pies, set up tables right on Main Street, display some of our quilts. Betty, your apple pie would bring anyone around." Darlene raised her hands for quiet. Ladies, let's organize this properly." She pulled a notepad from her quilting bag. "First, we need a date. Soon, before this ugliness gets any worse." "Saturday," Maya suggested. "The store's usually busiest then anyway." "Perfect." Darlene's pen scratched across the paper. "Now, what else?" Ideas flew around the table as Darlene wrote. "We could hang quilts in the windows," Margaret offered. "Cover up that awful chalk." Betty Chen pulled out her phone. "My daughter's on the PTA. I bet she could spread the word to school families." "And I'll call Pastor Ruth," Sarah added. "She'll know which families might need help with school shoes." Maya watched in amazement as the plan took shape. These women, many of whom she only knew from passing greetings, were mobilizing like a small army. Their determination filled the basement with purpose. "Maya?" Darlene touched her arm. "Would you talk to Hank? See if he'd be willing to let us do this?" Maya nodded, throat tight with emotion. "He might need some convincing. He's been pretty withdrawn lately." "Tell him we won't take no for an answer," Margaret declared, her quiet voice suddenly firm. "That man helped raise this town's children. It's our turn to stand by him." "And tell him my Josh is bringing his track team," Betty added. "Those boys want to thank him properly for all the running shoes he's fitted." The planning continued, voices warm with purpose. Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she watched these women, armed with quilting needles and recipe cards, plot to restore their neighbors' dignity. They weren't just planning an event. They were weaving together the torn fabric of their community. "Oh!" Sarah exclaimed suddenly. "We should get Tessa from the paper to come. Show her there's more to this story than that old photograph." Darlene's pen paused. "Would she come?" "She's always claimed to care about the whole truth," Maya said slowly. "Maybe seeing all this would help her understand." The morning light had strengthened, casting warm squares on the basement floor. Maya looked around the circle of determined faces and felt something expand in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or gratitude. These women had known Hank for years. They'd seen him measure countless children's feet, slip extra socks into bags, order special shoes for problem feet. They knew who he really was. "I should get Jaden to school," Maya said, standing reluctantly. "But I'll talk to Hank today." The women surrounded her with hugs, their arms strong and sure. "We've got this, honey," Darlene assured her. "Sometimes it takes a village to remind the village of its own heart." Maya hugged them back, one after another, realizing that Hank wasn't as alone as the town, or he himself, believed. Here in this basement, with the smell of coffee and the scatter of fabric scraps, a different story was taking shape. A story of mercy, measured not in yards of quilting cotton or inches of shoe leather, but in the stubborn love of neighbors who refused to let one of their own stand alone. The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows through Whitaker Shoe's front windows as Maya and Jaden stepped inside. The familiar bell chimed above their heads, but the usually busy store was empty, except for Hank, who stood behind the counter organizing receipts. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker," Jaden called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. He carried a small bucket filled with cleaning supplies that Maya had brought from home. Hank looked up, his weathered face softening at the sight of them. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customers." His voice was gruff but warm. Maya set down her bag of supplies. "We thought you could use some help getting ready for tomorrow's event." She pulled out some rags and polish. "Jaden's an expert shoe shiner now. He's been practicing on his sneakers." "Have not," Jaden giggled, but he was already reaching for the polish with enthusiasm. The morning light streamed through the windows as they worked. Maya tackled the windows first, washing away the last traces of chalk marks that had hurt so much. Hank moved methodically through the store, his experienced hands checking each display shoe for scuffs. "These quilts are beautiful," Maya said, carefully unfolding one of Darlene's creations. The pattern showed walking shoes in various colors, each one stitched with careful detail. "Where should we hang them?" Hank scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe along that back wall? Used to hang my sister's artwork there, years ago." His voice grew quiet for a moment before he cleared his throat. "The lighting's good there." As Maya worked with the quilts, Jaden sat cross-legged on the floor, tongue poking out in concentration as he polished a display Oxford. "Look, Mr. Whitaker, is this good enough?" Hank knelt down beside him, his knees creaking slightly. He picked up the shoe and turned it in the light. "Well, I'll be. That's some mighty fine work there, young man. You've got a steady hand." A hint of a smile crossed Hank's face, the first real one Maya had seen in weeks. It transformed his whole appearance, making him look years younger. The morning passed quickly as they worked. Maya organized the children's section, remembering how many times she'd seen Hank carefully measuring little feet here. Jaden moved from shoe to shoe, his enthusiasm never wavering. He chatted nonstop about his upcoming track meet, and Hank listened intently, offering encouraging nods. Around noon, Darlene arrived with more quilts and a basket of sandwiches. "Can't work on empty stomachs," she announced, setting everything on the counter. "How's it coming along? Look at my shoes, Mrs. Price." Jaden proudly pointed to his row of perfectly polished display shoes. "My word," Darlene exclaimed, adjusting her glasses. "I've never seen them shine so bright." They took a break, gathering around the counter to eat. Maya noticed how Hank's shoulders seemed less tense, how he actually took full bites of his sandwich instead of just picking at it like he had been lately. After lunch, they hung the remaining quilts. Each one told a story. There was one with children's shoes in rainbow colors, another with work boots arranged in a circle like a mandala. The afternoon sun made the fabrics glow, transforming the store into something magical. "It's like a museum now," Jaden said in awe, spinning slowly to take it all in. "More like a welcome home," Darlene added softly, patting Hank's arm. As the day wound down, they did final touch-ups. Maya arranged tomorrow's name tags, while Hank reviewed his fitting tools. Jaden insisted on one last inspection of his shoes. "I think we're ready," Maya said, looking around the transformed space with satisfaction. Hank stood in the center of his store, taking it all in. For a moment his eyes looked suspiciously bright. "I don't rightly know how to thank you folks," he said gruffly. "You've been thanking people for years, Mr. Whitaker," Maya replied. "Maybe it's time to let others thank you back." The setting sun painted the store in warm golden light as they prepared to leave. Jaden carefully put away his cleaning supplies, while Hank counted the register one last time. Maya gathered their belongings, feeling hopeful about tomorrow for the first time in days. As they stepped outside, Hank's keys jingled as he locked up. Maya glanced across the street and noticed Tessa standing there, camera in hand, watching them. The reporter's expression was unreadable in the fading light. The Saturday morning air felt crisp and clean as Maya helped set up folding tables outside Whitaker's shoes. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed one of Darlene's colorful quilts over a display table. A few early birds had already gathered across the street, whispering and pointing. "They'll come around," Eddie said, appearing beside her with a stack of chairs. "Just give them time." His Vietnam veteran cap sat proudly on his gray hair, metals glinting in the morning light. Jaden darted between the tables, arranging shoe boxes with careful attention. "Mom, look, Mrs. Price brought her famous apple pies." He pointed to where Darlene and her quilting circle were setting up a dessert station, the sweet aroma already drawing curious looks from passers-by. Inside the store, Hank moved slowly, methodically arranging his measuring tools. His shoulders carried tension, but his hands remained steady as they had for decades of fitting children's feet. Maya watched him through the window, noting how he straightened his name tag and smoothed his vest. Small gestures of dignity in the face of uncertainty. The first brave souls crossed the street around 9 o'clock. A young mother with 3 children approached cautiously, drawn by Jaden's enthusiastic waving. "Would you like some pie?" he asked, playing the perfect host. "And Mr. Whitaker can measure your feet special, just like he did mine." The ice began to thaw as more veterans arrived, sporting their service caps and badges. They set up chairs in a loose circle, swapping stories that drew people in despite themselves. Eddie's booming laugh carried across the gathering as he recounted tales from their service days. "Remember that time in Da Nang, Hank?" Eddie called out. "When you gave your own boots to that local kid?" Hank emerged from the store, a slight flush crossing his weathered cheeks. "They were too tight anyway," he mumbled, but a ghost of a smile played at his lips. More stories followed, tales of Hank's quiet generosity over the years. Mrs. Sade Johnson from the hardware store remembered how he'd fitted her grandson with special orthopedic shoes when insurance wouldn't cover them. "Never saw a bill," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "Just found them on my porch one morning." The crowd grew steadily. Children played tag between the tables, while their parents listened, ate pie, and gradually relaxed. The tension that had gripped the town began to dissolve in the warmth of shared memories and simple kindness. Maya watched as Hank worked, his experienced hands measuring tiny feet with the same care he'd always shown. Each child received his full attention, as if the controversy of recent weeks had never existed. When a little girl hugged him after trying on her new shoes, Maya saw tears glisten in the old man's eyes. Around noon, Jaden tugged at Maya's sleeve. "Mom, can I go change? The race is soon." His new sneakers were clutched to his chest like treasure. The school track meet was happening just 2 blocks away. Word had spread, and many from the gathering decided to walk over together. They formed an impromptu parade, led by Jaden practically bouncing with excitement. At the track, other parents and kids looked uncertain at first, seeing the crowd from Whitaker Shoes arrive. But Jaden's infectious enthusiasm couldn't be denied as he lined up with the other third graders for their heat. Hank stood at the edge of the track, his measuring tape still hanging around his neck. Maya noticed his hands were clasped tightly together, betraying his investment in the moment. The starter's whistle blew. Jaden's new shoes flashed in the sunlight as he ran, his face lit with pure joy. He wasn't the fastest, but he ran with his whole heart, arms pumping, grin wide. As he crossed the finish line, the crowd that had gathered for Shoes of Mercy Day erupted in genuine cheers. "Great running, sport," Hank called out as Jaden jogged over, still catching his breath. "Let's check if those shoes are still fitting right." He knelt down, pulling out his measuring tape with professional pride. Jaden stood still, beaming, as Hank measured his feet with the same careful attention he'd shown that first day. "Perfect fit," Hank declared, his voice gruff with emotion. Just perfect. The gathered crowd clapped. Not just for Jaden's race, but for something larger. For a moment of healing, of understanding, of community slowly finding its way back together. "Those shoes have some real magic in them," Eddie said, clapping Hank on the shoulder. "Nah," Hank replied softly, watching Jaden demonstrate his running form to some younger kids. "The magic's in the feet, wearing them. Always has been." The shrill wail of sirens jolted Maya from her sleep. Red and blue lights flashed through her bedroom window, casting eerie shadows on the wall. Her heart hammered as she jumped out of bed, a sense of dread washing over her. Down the hall, Jaden's door creaked open. "Mom?" His voice trembled. "What's happening?" Maya rushed to him, pulling on her coat. "I don't know, baby, but we need to check." She helped him into his jacket, grabbed her keys, and they hurried down the apartment stairs. The night air hit them like a slap. More sirens echoed through the empty streets as they drove toward downtown. Maya's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as they rounded the corner onto Main Street. Her breath caught in her throat. Flames reached toward the sky from Whitaker Shoes, angry orange tongues licking at the darkness. Black smoke billowed up in thick clouds, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning leather and rubber. 2 fire trucks were already on scene, firefighters dragging heavy hoses across the pavement. "No, no, no," Maya whispered, pulling over. Jaden pressed his face against the window, eyes wide with horror. "Mr. Hank's store!" he cried out. "Mom, where's Mr. Hank?" Maya scanned the growing crowd of onlookers. Eddie was there, still in his pajamas, talking urgently with a police officer. Pastor Ruth stood nearby, hands clasped in prayer. But no sign of Hank. "Stay in the car, Jaden," Maya ordered, but he was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "No way, we have to help." He grabbed her hand as they joined the crowd. The heat from the fire warmed their faces even from across the street. Water from the fire hoses ran in rivulets down the gutters, carrying ashes and debris. The Shoes of Mercy Day banner hung in tatters, one end aflame. "Eddie," Maya called out, pushing through the crowd. "Where's Hank?" Eddie's face was ashen. "He was inside. Lives in the apartment upstairs, remember? Firefighters went in a few minutes ago." Maya's legs went weak. Jaden's grip on her hand tightened. As if on cue, 2 firefighters emerged from the smoke-filled doorway, supporting a limp figure between them. Hank's white hair was dark with soot, his face slack and gray. "We need paramedics here now," one firefighter shouted. Maya sprinted forward, her nurse's training kicking in. "I'm a medical professional," she called out. The firefighters let her approach as they lowered Hank onto a stretcher. His breathing was shallow and raspy. Smoke inhalation, she thought, checking his pulse. Weak, but steady. An oxygen mask was quickly placed over his face. "Mr. Hank?" Jaden's small voice quavered behind her. "Please wake up." The paramedics arrived, pushing through with their equipment. Maya stepped back, pulling Jaden close as they worked on Hank. The flames continued to roar behind them, but the firefighters were making progress, the streams of water slowly beating back the inferno. "The ledger," Eddie muttered beside them. "All those names, all that history, gone." Maya watched as flames consumed the second floor, where she knew the stockroom was located. The leather-bound book that had proved Hank's decades of quiet kindness would be ashes by morning. Across the street she spotted Tessa taking photos, her face illuminated by her camera flash. Several people had their phones out, recording. Tomorrow, social media would explode with theories and accusations. Insurance fraud, probably. More shame heaped on a man who'd already carried too much. The paramedics loaded Hank into the ambulance. Maya overheard snippets of their radio conversation. Elderly male, severe smoke inhalation, possible carbon monoxide poisoning. "He's going to be okay, right?" Jaden asked, his voice small. Maya hugged him closer. "The doctors will do everything they can." As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens piercing the night, Pastor Ruth approached them. Her eyes were red with tears. "I'll drive you both to the hospital," she offered. They followed her to her car, Jaden looking back over his shoulder at the burning building. The firefighters had contained the blaze now, but it was clear nothing would be salvageable. The drive to the hospital was silent except for the occasional crackle of updates on Pastor Ruth's emergency radio. Maya held Jaden in her lap, though he was really too big for it now. Neither of them cared. They arrived just as the sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the clouds in shades of pink and gray. The emergency room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. They found Eddie already in the waiting room. He'd beaten them there on his motorcycle. "Any news?" Maya asked. Eddie shook his head. "They've got him on oxygen. He's still unconscious." He ran a hand over his face. "Called his sister Lena. She's driving in from Charlotte." Maya sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair, pulling Jaden close. The events of the day felt surreal. Just hours ago, they'd been celebrating, watching Jaden run his race, seeing Hank smile as he measured those small feet. Now this. Through the waiting room windows, they watched the sun rise fully, painting the world in harsh morning light. A doctor finally emerged, his face grave. "Mr. Whitaker is stable," he announced to their small group. "But he's still unconscious. The smoke inhalation was severe. We'll know more in the next 24 hours. Jaden buried his face in Maya's shoulder, his small body shaking with silent sobs. She stroked his back, her own tears falling freely now. The doctor continued with medical terms and possibilities, but Maya barely heard them. She was thinking of the store, of children being fitted for their first good shoes, of Hank's quiet generosity, of leather and laces and dreams gone up in smoke. Outside the window, emergency vehicles were still passing by, heading back from the scene downtown. Maya knew that by now, Whitaker's shoes would be nothing but a charred skeleton, its windows broken, its memories reduced to ashes. More than a building had been lost tonight. A piece of the town's heart had burned with it. The afternoon sun felt harsh and unforgiving as Maya sat in her car outside the nursing home, scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers. Her Facebook feed had exploded with accusations about Whitaker's shoes. "Obviously an insurance scam," read one comment. "Old man probably said it himself." "Convenient timing after all that controversy," said another. Maya's throat tightened as she read comment after comment, each one more vicious than the last. The fundraiser page that Darlene's Quilting Circle had set up that morning showed 0 donations. The Rebuild Whitaker Shoes campaign had frozen completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "Hank's still unconscious, but stable. Don't listen to these vultures online." Taking a deep breath, Maya stepped out of her car and walked toward the nursing home entrance. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing the familiar antiseptic smell. Several of her co-workers stood at the nurse's station, heads bent together in whispered conversation. They fell silent when they saw her. Maya. Sharon, the head nurse, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson needs her medication." Maya nodded and headed for the med cart, trying to ignore the stares boring into her back. As she measured out pills, her hands shook slightly. She'd worked here for 3 years. These people knew her. How could they believe she'd support someone truly hateful? Lewis. The stern voice of Margaret Wheeler, the facility administrator, made Maya jump. "My office. Now." The med cart rattled as Maya set down the pill cup. She followed Mrs. Wheeler down the sterile hallway, past rooms where elderly residents watched TV or dozed in their chairs. The administrator's office felt colder than usual, despite the spring warmth outside. "Sit down, please." Mrs. Wheeler gestured to the chair across from her desk. Her face was pinched with displeasure. Maya perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight. "Is something wrong?" "I think you know exactly what's wrong." Mrs. Wheeler tapped her computer screen. "Care to explain this?" The screen showed a photo from Saturday's event. Maya standing next to Hank, helping him measure a child's foot. The comments below were brutal. "That was a community outreach event," Maya said quietly. "We were providing shoes to children who needed them. You were publicly supporting a man with documented ties to hate groups." Mrs. Wheeler's voice was sharp. "This facility serves a diverse population, Maya. We can't have staff members associated with such controversy." "But that's not the whole story," Maya protested. Hank testified against. "I don't need to hear explanations." Mrs. Wheeler held up her hand. "The fact is, your involvement has brought negative attention to this facility. Several families have already called with concerns." Maya's chest tightened. "I've worked here for 3 years. My patient care has always been excellent." "Your performance isn't the issue." Mrs. Wheeler pulled out a form. "This is about protecting our reputation. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending review." "Suspended?" Maya's voice cracked. "For how long?" "Until the board makes a final decision." Mrs. Wheeler pushed the form across the desk. "You'll need to sign this." Maya stared at the paper, her vision blurring. Her entire paycheck went to rent and bills. Jaden needed new school supplies. The kitchen cupboards were already getting bare. "This isn't right," she whispered. "You're punishing me for showing kindness to someone who needed support." "I'm protecting this facility from controversy." Mrs. Wheeler's tone was final. "Sign the form, Maya." With trembling fingers, Maya picked up the pen. She thought of Hank lying unconscious in the hospital, of Jaden's proud face when he won his race in his new shoes, of the decades of secret kindness recorded in the now-destroyed ledger. The signature she scrawled barely looked like her own. "Please leave your badge and key card," Mrs. Wheeler said. "Security will escort you out." Maya unclipped her ID badge, the familiar weight of it suddenly strange in her hand. She placed it on the desk along with her key card, each small sound feeling like a door closing. The security guard waited outside, his face uncomfortable but determined. Maya walked beside him down the hallway, past the nurse's station where her co-workers pretended not to watch, past Mrs. Patterson's room, where the elderly woman called out, "Maya, is it time for my medicine?" "Someone else will help you," Maya managed to say, her voice steady despite the ache in her throat. The automatic doors whooshed open one last time. Maya stepped into the afternoon sunlight, feeling untethered. The security guard stood watching until she reached her car. Inside, Maya gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't. There was too much at stake. Jaden needed her to be strong, Hank needed her support, and the truth needed to be told. But as she stared at the nursing home building where she'd worked so hard, helped so many people, and thought she'd found her place, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, started her car, and drove away from the place that had just shown her how quickly kindness could become a liability. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room made Maya's nose twitch as she watched Hank lying there, his weathered face pale against the white pillow. The steady beep of monitors filled the otherwise quiet room. Eddie sat in the vinyl chair beside the bed, his Marine Corps cap twisted in his strong hands. "Maybe it's time," Hank said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Time to just sell the lot and disappear." Eddie's head snapped up. "Now hold on there, brother. I mean it, Eddie." Hank's eyes remained fixed on the ceiling. "Town's made up its mind about me. Can't fight the whole world anymore." Maya stepped closer to the bed, her nurse's aide instincts making her check his IV line and adjust his blanket. "Mr. Whitaker, please don't talk like that. There are people who know the truth." "Truth." Hank's laugh turned into a rattling cough. Truth got buried under that burned-out building, same as everything else. Ledger's gone. Proof's gone. He closed his eyes. Maybe it's what I deserve for keeping quiet all these years. That's nonsense, and you know it, Eddie growled, leaning forward. You protected your sister. Anyone would have done the same. Maya watched Hank's face tighten with pain that had nothing to do with smoke inhalation. I let fear rule me, he muttered. Should have spoken up years ago. Now look what it's cost. Not just me, but Maya here lost her job. Store's gone. Everything's gone. It's not your fault I got suspended, Maya said firmly, though her stomach clenched at the reminder. That was my boss's choice, not yours. Through the window, she could see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot. Jaden was at a neighbor's house, probably doing homework, unaware that his mother's world was crumbling piece by piece. She thought of his proud face when he'd won that race in his new sneakers, how Hank had beamed like a grandfather. 47 years, Hank said softly. 47 years, measuring little feet, watching kids grow up, trying to make things right. And now. He gestured weakly at the TV mounted on the wall, where the local news showed footage of the burned store again. Eddie stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. I'm not letting you give up, Hank. Not after everything. There's got to be someone from the old days, someone who remembers. Leave it alone, Eddie, Hank said tiredly. Sometimes you just got to know when you're beat. Maya felt helpless watching these two proud veterans, one ready to fight, one ready to surrender. She thought of the leather ledger. All those careful entries of children helped over the decades, now nothing but ashes. The truth of Hank's quiet generosity had literally gone up in smoke. The real estate agent called this morning, Hank continued, his voice getting weaker. Said even with insurance, best thing might be to sell the lot. Clean break. Maybe move down to Florida. Florida? Eddie exploded. You hate Florida. You said it's nothing but mosquitoes and tourists. A nurse poked her head in. Everything okay in here? Mr. Whitaker needs his rest. Maya recognized Sally from the times their shifts had overlapped at the nursing home. The other woman's eyes slid past her without acknowledgement. Another friend lost to gossip and assumptions. We're fine, Maya said quietly. Just talking. After the nurse left, silence fell heavy in the room. The sun had sunk lower, painting orange streaks across the sky. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another message from her supervisor about maintaining professional distance from controversial situations. She ignored it. I should get home to Jaden, she said finally. Mr. Whitaker, please don't make any decisions about selling yet. Give it a few days at least. Hank just closed his eyes again, looking every one of his 72 years. Eddie walked Maya to the elevator, his face dark with worry. I've never seen him like this, Eddie confessed. Not even after Nam. He's just given up. What can we do? Maya asked, feeling the weight of helplessness pressing down on her shoulders. I don't know, child. I just don't know. The drive home felt endless. Maya's apartment was dark and quiet when she arrived. Mrs. Chen next door had already dropped Jaden off. She found him asleep on top of his homework, his new sneakers still on his feet. Carefully, Maya untied the laces and eased the shoes off. The sight of them brought tears to her eyes. Such a simple thing. A pair of shoes, a kind gesture, an old man's lifetime of quiet good works. How had it all gone so wrong? She tucked a blanket around Jaden and went to her own room. The weight of everything, her suspended job, the burned store, Hank's defeat pressed down until her knees buckled. She sank down beside her bed, clasping her hands the way her grandmother had taught her. Lord, she whispered, her voice catching, I don't understand why this is happening. Mr. Whitaker is a good man. He doesn't deserve this. Please, please let the truth come out somehow. Show us a way forward. Give us strength to keep fighting. Her prayers dissolved into silent tears as the night deepened around her. Outside her window, sirens wailed in the distance, and somewhere a dog barked at shadows. Maya stayed on her knees, praying for a miracle she wasn't sure would come. Maya sat at her small kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee. Jaden had just left for school, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. The events of the past few days felt like a bad dream she couldn't shake. The smell of smoke still clung to her clothes from visiting the charred remains of Whitaker's shoes yesterday. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not this early. Through the peephole, she saw Eddie's familiar face, but he wasn't alone. An elderly black man stood beside him, wearing pressed slacks and a Vietnam veteran's cap similar to Eddie's. Maya opened the door, confusion evident on her face. "Eddie, what's going on?" "Maya, meet James Washington," Eddie said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Hank's squadmate from Vietnam. The one he saved." James Washington smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Miss Lewis, I've heard a lot about you from Eddie here. May we come in?" Maya stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Of course, please. Can I get you some coffee?" "No time for that," Eddie said, pulling out a kitchen chair. "Show her, James." James carefully removed an aged manila envelope from his jacket pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "I've kept these safe for over 50 years, he said, his voice rich and deep. "Never thought I'd need them, but Eddie called and explained everything." He withdrew 2 items, a yellowed letter and a black and white photograph. The letter's creases were worn soft from years of folding and unfolding. The date at the top read, April 15, 1970. "Hank wrote this to me after we got back home," James explained, smoothing the paper carefully. "We'd been through hell together in Nam, saved each other more times than we could count. But coming back to the States, well, things were different then." Maya leaned forward, reading the careful handwriting. "Dear James, I can't stop thinking about what happened at the welcome home ceremony. The way those men treated you, it made me sick. After everything we've been through. After you carried Williams 3 miles with a bullet in your own leg, after you pulled me out of that river. How dare they say you couldn't drink from the same fountain? I've been raised with these attitudes my whole life. My father's the worst of them. But I want you to know, I'm done with it. All of it. What we saw over there, what we did for each other, that's the truth about men. Not the color of their skin. I'm opening my own shoe store next month. Everyone who walks in will be treated with respect. I don't care what my father or anyone else says. I've seen too much death to waste time on hate. Your brother in arms? Hank." Maya's hands shook as she held the letter. James then passed her the photograph. It showed a much younger Hank, his dark hair still free of gray, carrying boxes of shoes through floodwaters. Behind him was a small church with a predominantly black congregation helping unload a truck. That was after the big flood of '72, James explained. Same day that other photo was taken, the one that reporter posted. Hank had been delivering shoes to black churches all morning. Someone caught him near that rally later, but they didn't show what he was really doing that day. "He never told anyone," Eddie added softly. "Not even me. Just kept quiet and let people think what they wanted." "Why?" Maya whispered. "Why didn't he defend himself?" James shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "That's Hank. He figured actions spoke louder than words, and he was protecting his sister from their father's anger. That man was dangerous, especially back then. But now," Maya looked down at the letter again, at the passionate words of a young man taking a stand against hatred. "Now, we need his words. The town needs to see this." "That's why I'm here," James said firmly. "It's time people knew who Hank Whitaker really is. Not just what he did in Vietnam, but what he's been doing quietly all these years since." Maya carefully held the letter and photo, feeling their weight, not just the physical weight, but the weight of truth they carried. Tears began streaming down her face as she realized what these pieces of evidence meant. This was the proof the town needed to see the real Hank Whitaker. Her tears fell onto the protective plastic sleeve holding the photograph, and she quickly wiped them away with her sleeve. These precious documents represented not just Hank's past, but his character, the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along, just like those quiet acts of kindness in his leather ledger. The bell above Main Street Cafe chimed as Maya and Eddie entered. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. In the corner booth, Tessa Green sat alone, her laptop open and a half-eaten muffin pushed to the side. She looked up, her expression guarded. "Thanks for meeting us," Maya said, sliding into the booth. Eddie took the seat beside her, laying a worn manila envelope on the table. Tessa closed her laptop. "I admit I was surprised to get your call." She glanced at the envelope. "You said you had something important to show me?" Eddie's weathered hands carefully opened the envelope. "Before we show you these, I want you to understand something." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "What you wrote about Hank, that single snapshot from 1972, it hurt a lot of people, good people." Tessa's shoulders tensed. "I reported what I saw in that photo." As a journalist, Maya cut in softly. "Don't you want the whole story?" Eddie pulled out a yellowed letter, its creases deep from years of folding and unfolding. Next to it, he placed a faded photograph. Tessa leaned forward, squinting at the image. The photograph showed a younger Hank Whitaker, his dark hair not yet gray, carrying boxes of shoes through the doors of a small church. The sign visible in the background read, "First Baptist Church of Hope." A group of black children sat on the steps, trying on new shoes, while their parents spoke with Hank. "That's from 1970, Eddie explained. "After the flood that hit the east side of town, Hank didn't just donate shoes, he fitted every single child himself." Tessa picked up the photograph, studying it closely. Her professional mask slipped slightly, revealing surprise. "This was 2 years before the rally photo?" "Read the letter," Maya urged gently. "It's from the same time." Tessa unfolded the paper carefully, its edges soft with age. The handwriting was neat, but passionate. The words written with clear purpose. "Dear Dad, I won't be at the rally tomorrow. I won't be at any of them anymore. What you and your friends are doing, it's wrong. Dead wrong. I've seen too much in this war to stay quiet. The men I serve with, the ones who've saved my life, and who I'd die to protect, they come from everywhere, look like everyone. They're my brothers. I know this letter means I'm choosing a side. So be it. I choose what's right. I choose to help people, not hurt them. The store will do the same. Every child who needs shoes will get them, no matter who they are or where they come from. You raised me to stand up for what I believe in. This is me doing exactly that. Your son, Hank." Tessa read the letter twice, her fingers trembling slightly as she set it down. The cafe seemed quieter now, as if the weight of history had settled over their booth. "He testified against his father's group later that year," Eddie added. "That's why he was near the rally in your photo. He was leaving the courthouse. The records were sealed to protect his sister, Lena. She was still living at home then." Maya watched as Tessa's face flushed with shame. The reporter pushed her laptop aside completely, pulling out her phone to take pictures of both the letter and photograph. "I should have dug deeper," Tessa admitted, her voice thick. "I saw that rally photo and thought I had my story. I never—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I never imagined there was so much more." "Hank never defended himself because he didn't want to drag up his father's past," Maya explained. "He thought staying quiet was better for everyone. But his silence let others write his story," Tessa said, more to herself than to them. She looked up, meeting their eyes. "I need to fix this. The truth needs to be told, all of it." Eddie gathered the letter and photo, returning them carefully to the envelope. "That's why we came to you. You have the platform. You can help people understand who Hank really is." Tessa was already typing notes on her phone. "I'll need to verify everything, get statements from the church members if any are still around. Do you have contact information for Hank's sister?" "We can help with that," Maya said. "But Tessa, this needs to run soon. Hank's still in the hospital and people are still believing the worst." "I'll work through lunch," Tessa promised. "This will be posted tonight." She paused, then added softly, "I owe him that much." They left Tessa in the cafe, watching through the window as she began typing furiously on her laptop. Maya checked her phone periodically throughout the day, waiting for the notification. Finally, just after dinner, the alert came. The headline read, "Whitaker was never who we thought. The untold truth of mercy." Below it was the photo of young Hank at the church, followed by the words, "I was wrong. We all were." Here's the real story of a man who chose love over hate, mercy over judgment, and paid the price for both. The late morning sun filtered through the hospital room window as Detective Sarah Chen stood at the foot of Hank's bed. Maya sat in the visitor's chair, while Eddie leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The detective held a thin manila folder. "We've identified the arsonist," Detective Chen said, her voice steady. "A man named Marcus Weber, from 3 states over. He runs a controversial social media channel dedicated to stirring up local conflicts for views." Hank's weathered hands gripped the thin hospital blanket. "Why my store?" He saw the original viral post about you and decided it was an opportunity. Detective Chen's face hardened. He live-streamed himself, setting the fire, thinking it would get him more followers. Instead, it got him arrested when he tried to leave town. Maya's hand found Hank's arm, squeezing gently. "So it wasn't anyone from here? Not someone who believed those rumors about you?" "No, ma'am." Detective Chen shook her head. Weber admitted he didn't know anything about Mr. Whitaker or the store's history. He just wanted attention. Eddie pushed off from the wall, his jaw tight. Burned down 50 years of memories for some clicks on the internet. "The good news," Detective Chen continued, "is that his confession and the evidence are solid. The DA is pressing charges for arson and reckless endangerment. He's also facing federal charges for crossing state lines to commit a crime." Hank closed his eyes for a moment, his expression a mix of relief and lingering pain. When he opened them again, there was a glimmer of his old strength. "What about the store?" "Fire marshal completed the investigation yesterday." Detective Chen consulted her notes. "The building's structural integrity is compromised, but the foundation is sound. It could be rebuilt." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Ruth stepped in, followed by Darlene Price and 3 other members of the quilting circle. Each carried casserole dishes and concerned smiles. "Hope we're not interrupting," Pastor Ruth said. "We brought lunch and some news." Darlene set her dish down and pulled out her phone. "The online fundraiser for rebuilding passed $20,000 this morning. People are sharing Tessa's new article everywhere. And not just locals," one of the quilting ladies added. "It's reaching people in other states who want to help preserve small-town shoe stores. They're calling you a dying breed, Hank." Eddie chuckled. "Hear that, old man? You're endangered." A ghost of a smile crossed Hank's face. "Feels that way some days." Detective Chen excused herself, but not before adding, "The whole department's behind you, Mr. Whitaker. My kids got their first school shoes from your store last fall." As she left, more visitors arrived. The hospital staff had long since given up enforcing visitor limits for room 214. Mayor Thompson appeared with his wife, carrying blueprints for a rebuilt storefront. The head of the Chamber of Commerce brought preliminary paperwork for historical building grants. "The town council met in emergency session this morning," the mayor explained, spreading the blueprints across Hank's meal tray. "We're fast-tracking permits for rebuilding. And look here, we can expand the back room, add proper ventilation for the leatherwork." Maya watched Hank's face as he studied the plans. Color had returned to his cheeks, and his hands were steady as he traced the proposed layout. The mayor's wife pulled out her tablet and showed him messages of support flooding the town's social media pages. "Did you see what the high school track team posted?" she asked, scrolling to a video. The entire team stood on the track, wearing Whitaker Shoes t-shirts, sharing stories of their first pair of running shoes. Jaden appeared in the video, holding up his sneakers. "Mr. Whitaker measured my feet 3 times to make sure they were perfect. He said every runner needs the right foundation." Hank's eyes glistened. A nurse arrived with Tessa's article, freshly printed from the hospital's computer. "Thought you might want to see this, Mr. Whitaker. It's all over the break room." The room quieted as Hank took the papers. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear as he began to read. "The Truth About Hank Whitaker. A Story of Quiet Courage." By Tessa Green. In 1972, a young man stood near a hate rally, not in support but in secret protest. Hours later, he would testify against his own father in a closed courthouse, choosing justice over family ties. That man was Hank Whitaker, and for 50 years he has carried the weight of that photograph without ever telling his side of the story. As a journalist, I failed him. I saw an old picture and assumed the worst. I didn't dig deeper, didn't ask the right questions, but thanks to the persistence of a few dedicated community members, the truth has finally come to light. Long before that controversial photo was taken, Hank Whitaker had already chosen his path. A recently discovered letter from 1970 shows him denouncing racism to his fellow Marines. Veterans tell stories of his courage in Vietnam, where he risked his life to save soldiers of all races, and a worn ledger, titled Laces of Mercy, reveals decades of quiet generosity to families of every background. The real story of Hank Whitaker isn't in that viral photograph. It's written in the thousands of footsteps of children who walked out of his store standing taller, whether their families could afford to pay or not. Hank's voice caught. He lowered the paper, looking around the room at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, his community. "Maybe," he said softly, "it's not too late." Maya sat in Pastor Ruth's office, staring at the empty tissue box she'd just depleted. The past few days had been a whirlwind since the truth about the arsonist came out. But the loss of the Laces of Mercy ledger still weighed heavy on her heart. Pastor Ruth stood at her filing cabinet, pulling out a worn leather portfolio. "You know, Maya, sometimes God works in the most ordinary ways." She adjusted her reading glasses with a gentle smile. "Last fall, I asked Hank if I could document some of the store's history for our church archives." Maya straightened in her chair. "The store's history?" "Mm-hmm." Pastor Ruth's fingers worked methodically through the portfolio's contents. "I've always believed in preserving our community's stories, especially the quiet acts of kindness that shape us." She pulled out a small USB drive and held it up. "When I saw that ledger in his office, I knew it was important. Took photos of every single page." Maya's hand flew to her mouth. "You mean every name, every shoe size, every little note Hank made about the children he helped?" Pastor Ruth nodded, already moving to her computer. "Would you like to see?" Maya could barely speak. She watched as Pastor Ruth plugged in the drive and opened a folder labeled Whitaker Archives. The first image appeared on the screen. A crisp photograph of the ledger's cover, the words Laces of Mercy, clear in Hank's precise handwriting. "Let's use the projector," Pastor Ruth suggested, pressing a button on the remote. The white wall behind her desk illuminated, and the image grew larger. As Pastor Ruth scrolled through the photos, Maya's vision blurred with tears. Page after page of careful entries stretched across decades. Some were brief. Tommy W., age 8, needed winter boots. Others told fuller stories. Sarah M.'s house burned down. Family of 5, all needed shoes. Dad too proud to accept charity. Marked as clearance pricing. "Look at this section," Pastor Ruth said softly, stopping at an entry from 1975. This was just 3 years after that rally photo was taken. Maya leaned forward to read. "Johnson family, Reverend Johnson's kids growing too fast. Church budget tight. 3 pairs of Sunday shoes. No charge, marked as promotional items. Reverend Johnson was our first black pastor," Pastor Ruth explained. "Hank helped his family in secret for years." They continued scrolling. The entries evolved with time, but the care in each notation remained constant. Maya recognized names of people she knew, their children now grown, some with children of their own. There were notes about medical bills, lost jobs, house fires, and countless other hardships that had brought people to Hank's door. "Here's something special," Pastor Ruth said, clicking to a page from the mid-1980s. "Look at this pattern." Maya studied the entries. Every Friday for a month, there was a note about shoes being provided to different children from the same neighborhood. What was happening then? The textile mill closed, Pastor Ruth explained. Whole families lost their income overnight. Hank never said a word, but every child from those families somehow had new shoes for school that fall. The weight of history filled the room. Maya thought about how many steps had been taken in those given shoes, how many children had walked to school, played at recess, or danced at their first party wearing Hank's quiet mercy. "There's more," Pastor Ruth said, opening another folder. I also photographed the thank you notes he kept. New images appeared. Crayon drawings, carefully printed children's letters, notes from grateful parents. One showed a school photo of a smiling girl wearing bright red shoes, with a message scrawled on the back. "First day of kindergarten. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." Maya recognized the handwriting in the margins of many pages. Hank's brief notes about following up, checking sizes, making sure younger siblings were taken care of too. The ledger wasn't just a record of charity, it was a chronicle of connection, of one man weaving an invisible safety net beneath his community's feet. "This is why he never defended himself," Maya whispered. "He didn't want anyone to feel exposed." Pastor Ruth nodded. "Hank always said true kindness doesn't need an audience." They continued scrolling through the digital archive. Maya noticed how the entries became more detailed over time, as if Hank had grown more invested in each story. Some included little victories. Marcus T. made the basketball team in his new shoes. Jenny R. walked at graduation, first in her family. "Wait," Maya said suddenly, pointing at an entry from just last year. "That's Mrs. Garcia's twins from the nursing home where I work." The note read, "Torres twins. Grandmother raising them on fixed income. Growing fast. Will need follow-up in spring. Your paths have been crossing with Hank's mercy for longer than you knew," Pastor Ruth said gently. Maya sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of what she was seeing. The ledger hadn't just been a book of business records, it was a testament to decades of quiet faith in action. Every entry represented a moment when someone's burden had been lightened, when dignity had been preserved, when hope had been given sturdy souls to walk on. "We need to show him," Maya said, wiping her eyes. "Hank needs to know it wasn't all lost in the fire." Pastor Ruth smiled, already reaching for her phone. "I think you're right. And I think it's time for these stories to help rebuild more than just the store." Maya watched as the entries continued to scroll past on the wall. Hundreds of names, thousands of shoes, countless acts of mercy that had walked silently through their town's streets for almost 50 years. Each one was a thread in the fabric of their community, stronger together than any flame could destroy. The late afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, catching dust motes in its beam. On the wall, the projected images continued their quiet testimony, proof that love could outlast fire, that mercy could survive scandal, and that sometimes the most powerful stories were the ones written in shoe sizes and simple kindness. The VA hall buzzed with energy as people squeezed into the rows of metal folding chairs. Maya helped Hank settle into a seat near the front, his hospital discharge papers still fresh in his pocket. The familiar scent of coffee and donuts wafted through the air, mixing with the mild mustiness that seemed permanently embedded in the building's walls. Eddie Morales stood at the podium, his Vietnam veteran cap placed carefully beside his notes. The room gradually quieted as he cleared his throat. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Especially you, Hank." He nodded toward his old friend. "What happened to Whitaker's shoes was a tragedy, but sometimes from ashes, something better can grow." Maya watched Hank's weathered hands grip his cane tighter. She knew how much it cost him to be here, facing the community that had so recently turned against him. "We've been talking," Eddie continued, gesturing to the committee members seated behind him. "Insurance will cover some rebuilding costs, but instead of just restoring what was lost, we have a different vision." Darlene Price, her quilting needle still tucked behind her ear, stepped up to the microphone. For decades, Hank ran more than a shoe store. Through Laces of Mercy, he created a safety net for families in need. "We think it's time to make that mission official." She unrolled a large poster board showing architectural drawings. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to propose Laces of Mercy Community Outfitters, a nonprofit co-op dedicated to providing quality footwear to every child in our community, regardless of their family's ability to pay." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pastor Ruth stood up from her seat. "The church council has already pledged matching funds for the first year. Several local businesses have also expressed interest in regular contributions." Tessa, the reporter who'd started all the trouble, raised her hand from the back row. "How would it work?" Eddie pulled out a folder. "Regular retail operations would support the giving program. Those who can pay full price do. creating a sustainable model. But we'd also have a dignity-based sliding scale system. He glanced at Maya. No parent should have to choose between shoes and groceries. Maya felt Jaden squeeze her hand. She remembered counting those last $28 at her kitchen table, the shame of her declined card, and Hank's quiet act of kindness that had started everything. We've drawn up preliminary bylaws, Eddie continued. The co-op would be overseen by a community board, but we need 2 key positions filled immediately. He turned to face Hank. First, we need a greeter, in chief. Someone who knows shoes inside and out, who can make every customer feel welcome and valued. Hank's eyes widened. I'm too old to run a store anymore, he protested softly. You won't be running it, Darlene interjected. You'll be doing what you do best. Caring for people, measuring little feet, sharing your knowledge, being the heart of the place just like always. Pastor Ruth stepped forward. Which brings us to our second position. We need a manager who understands both the business and the mission. Someone with compassion, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. She smiled at Maya. The board would like to nominate Maya Lewis for the position. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She looked around the room, seeing not judgment but warmth in the faces surrounding her. Even Tessa was nodding thoughtfully. I don't have any management experience, Maya stammered. But you have something better, Eddie said. You saw the truth when others wouldn't look. You stood by Hank when it cost you your job. And you understand firsthand why this mission matters. Darlene added. Plus, we've all seen how you organize the nursing home schedules. You're more qualified than you think. The room fell quiet, waiting. Maya felt Jaden tugging at her sleeve. Mom, he whispered, you'd be really good at it. Hank slowly pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. His voice was rough with emotion. When I first opened my store, my father told me I was betraying everything he taught me by serving everyone equally, but I knew he was wrong. He paused, gathering strength. I've spent 50 years trying to make up for the hate I was raised in. Maybe it's time to do it openly, with help. He turned to face Maya. I trust you, girl. You saw past the rumors to the truth. I'd be honored to be your greeter-in-chief if you'll have this, old man. Tears pricked Maya's eyes as she stood. The vinyl chair squeaked against the floor in the hushed room. Well, she said, her voice stronger than she expected, I guess we better start measuring some feet. A cheer erupted through the VA hall. Darlene's quilting circle immediately began discussing display ideas. The veterans started planning a renovation schedule. Pastor Ruth hugged Maya while Jaden danced around them, chattering about helping after school. Hank remained standing, looking slightly dazed as people came up to shake his hand. Maya watched as decades of guilt and isolation visibly lifted from his shoulders. When their eyes met across the crowded room, they shared a smile of understanding. Sometimes the best way forward was to walk together, one step at a time. Eddie tapped the microphone. All right, folks, let's talk specifics. We've got blueprints to review and committees to form. This is just the beginning. The energy in the room shifted from celebration to purpose as people pulled their chairs closer, eager to help build something new from the ashes of the past. The spring sun warmed the sidewalk as volunteers swarmed around the burned-out shell of Whitaker Shoes. The acrid smell of smoke had finally faded, replaced by the sharp scent of fresh lumber and paint. Hank sat in his metal folding chair, his wooden cane resting across his lap as he watched the transformation unfold before him. Looking good, isn't it? Maya asked, pausing from directing a group of high school students who were carrying boards. Her nurse's aide uniform was replaced with old jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair tied back with a bandana. Hank nodded, his eyes misting slightly. Never thought I'd see the day, he said softly, watching as Eddie Morales and 2 other veterans carefully measured the new window frames. Jaden darted between the workers, a paintbrush clutched in his small hand. His face lit up when he spotted the can of bright blue paint designated for the front door. Can I help with this part, Mom, please? Maya smiled and ruffled his hair. That's actually your special job. Mr. Hank picked you himself to paint the door. The boy's eyes widened as he looked at Hank for confirmation. The old man's weathered face cracked into a warm smile. "Nobody else I'd trust more with such an important task, son." Darlene Price and her quilting circle had set up a refreshment station under a pop-up tent, keeping the workers supplied with cold lemonade and homemade cookies. They chattered as they worked on a special project, a banner for the grand opening. The reconstruction had become a community effort. Pastor Ruth's congregation had donated building supplies. The high school shop class volunteered their skills. Even Tessa, the reporter, rolled up her sleeves to help, her camera temporarily forgotten as she worked alongside everyone else. "Hold that brush straight up and down," Hank instructed Jaden as the boy carefully applied paint to the new door. "That's it. Nice, even strokes." His voice carried the same patient tone he'd used for decades while fitting children for shoes. The bright blue paint transformed the simple wooden door into something special. Jaden's tongue stuck out slightly as he concentrated on not missing any spots. "Is this how you learned to paint, Mr. Hank?" "My father taught me," Hank said quietly, then added with a gentle smile. "But I think you're doing an even better job than I did back then." Maya watched the interaction from where she was organizing boxes of donated shoes. The sight of Hank mentoring Jaden made her heart swell. The old man who had once hidden behind silence was now openly sharing stories with anyone who asked, his shoulders straighter despite needing the cane. Throughout the day, more townspeople arrived with donations, shoes, display racks, and office supplies. Each item was logged into a new leather-bound ledger, continuing the tradition of the original Laces of Mercy book. The pages would now record not just the giving of shoes, but the stories of a community coming together. Eddie stepped back from his work on the windows, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You know, Hank, this place is looking even better than before." "Different," Hank corrected, his eyes taking in the changes. "Better different." The new sign above the door would read, "Laces of Mercy Community Outfitters," but underneath in smaller letters, "Founded as Whitaker Shoes, 1970. It was important to Hank that the history remained, both the hard parts and the good. As afternoon turned to evening, Darlene and her quilting circle began hanging their creation. The banner unfurled slowly, revealing careful stitching in bold, warm colors. Every step matters stood out in letters that seemed to dance across the fabric, surrounded by patterns of footprints, big and small, work boots and baby shoes, all connected in an intricate design. The workers paused, tools lowering as they admired the banner. Hank pushed himself to his feet, leaning on his cane as he studied the words. They weren't just about shoes anymore. They were about journey, about change, about moving forward together. Jaden stepped back from the now completed blue door, his face speckled with paint, but beaming with pride. "Look, Mr. Hank, I did it!" "You sure did, son," Hank replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You sure did." The last rays of sunset caught the fresh paint, making it gleam like a beacon of hope. The banner fluttered gently in the evening breeze, its message clear against the new facade. Every step matters. A blue sedan pulled up to the curb, its engine cutting off with a gentle purr. Through the windshield, an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair sat gripping the steering wheel, her face a mix of uncertainty and resolve. Hank's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen his sister Lena in person for nearly 2 decades. Maya noticed his reaction and squeezed his shoulder gently. "Would you like some privacy?" she asked quietly. Hank nodded, his throat too tight for words. Maya gathered the nearby volunteers and guided them toward the back of the building, giving the siblings space. Lena stepped out of her car, clutching a covered plate of what looked like cookies. She wore a simple floral dress and sensible shoes, her movements careful and measured as she approached her brother. The years had silvered her hair and added lines around her eyes, but she still carried herself with the same quiet dignity Hank remembered. "Hello, Henry," she said softly, using his full name like she always had when they were young. "Lena." His voice cracked slightly. "You came." She glanced at the construction around them, then back to her brother. "I saw the article. The truth about what you did back then." She paused, shifting the plate in her hands. "I brought snickerdoodles." "Still your favorite?" Hank managed a small smile. "Always were." A carpenter's hammer rang out somewhere behind them, making Lena jump slightly. Hank gestured to an empty folding chair beside his. "Would you like to sit?" Lena settled into the chair, placing the cookies between them. The siblings sat in silence for a moment, watching the volunteers work. The spring breeze carried the scent of sawdust and fresh paint. "I should have come sooner," Lena finally said, her hands twisting in her lap. "After what happened with Daddy, after you testified." She took a shaky breath. "I was so scared, Henry. Not just of him, but of what people would think. Of being tied to all that hate." Hank's grip tightened on his cane. "I understand, Lena. I've carried that fear too, spent decades trying to outrun it." "But you didn't run," she said softly. "You stood up to him. You testified. And then you spent all these years helping people, while I just—" She wiped at her eyes. "I hid. Let the shame keep me away from my own brother. I should have reached out," Hank admitted, his voice rough. "Should have explained why I kept so quiet about everything. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, by keeping the past buried. But maybe the silence only made things worse." Lena pulled a tissue from her pocket, dabbing at her eyes. "I saw all those names in the article, all those children you helped, the shoes you gave away." She looked at him directly now. "You were fighting Daddy's hatred the whole time, weren't you? Just in your own quiet way." Hank nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Every pair of shoes was a small way of making things right, of trying to be better than what we came from." "I've missed you, Henry," Lena said, reaching over to touch his hand. "Missed my big brother." Hank turned his hand over to clasp hers. "I've missed you too, little sister." They sat together, hands linked, watching the rebuilding continue around them. A young volunteer was measuring shelving nearby, marking the wood with careful precision. "Would you like to see inside?" Hank asked, gesturing toward the half-finished interior with his cane. "It's not much yet, but—" "I'd like that very much," Lena said, standing and offering her arm for support. They made their way slowly into the building, past stacks of lumber and partially installed fixtures. The afternoon sun streamed through the new windows, casting long shadows across the unfinished floor. "The shelves will go here," Hank explained, gesturing to the freshly framed walls. "And over there, that's where we'll fit the children." Lena looked around, taking it all in. "It's going to be beautiful, Henry." They stood by the half-finished shelves, decades of unspoken words hanging between them. Then Lena turned and wrapped her arms around her brother, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Hank held her close, his own tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry," they both whispered at the same time, and something old and hard finally crumbled between them, washed away by shared tears and the promise of renewal. Maya pulled Jaden's Superman blanket up to his chin, smoothing out the wrinkles with practiced care. The streetlight outside cast a gentle glow through his window, making shadows dance on the walls of their small apartment bedroom. His eyes were bright despite the late hour, filled with an excitement that reminded her of Christmas Eve. "Mommy," Jaden whispered, his small hand reaching for hers. "Tomorrow feels like a miracle." Maya's heart swelled as she perched on the edge of his bed. "It does, doesn't it, baby?" She ran her fingers through his curls, remembering how just months ago she'd counted her last dollars at their kitchen table for his shoes. "Will Mr. Hank really let me ring the bell first?" Jaden asked, wiggling under his covers. "That's what he promised." Maya smiled, remembering Hank's insistence that Jaden should be the first to ring the new brass bell they'd installed by the door. "But you need your sleep first. Tomorrow's a big day. Can I wear my race shoes?" His eyes sparkled in the dim light. "The ones that started everything?" "They're a little scuffed now," Maya said, reaching down to touch the worn sneakers beside his bed. "But I think that's perfect for tomorrow. They tell our story." Jaden yawned, finally showing signs of tiredness. "Pastor Ruth says stories are important, like how Mr. Hank's old shoes from the war are going in that glass box on the wall." "That's right." Maya adjusted his pillow. "Those boots helped him walk through hard times, just like his store helped so many others walk through theirs." "Like us," Jaden murmured, his eyes starting to droop. "We were scared about shoes, but now we have a whole store full of them." Maya felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "That's right, baby. And now we get to help other people who might be scared about shoes too," Miss Darlene said. Jaden's words slowed as sleep began to take hold. She said sometimes God turns bad things into good things, like when the store burned down, but now it's even better. Miss Darlene is very wise, Maya whispered, watching his breathing become deeper and more regular. Mommy? His voice was barely audible now. I'm glad you didn't believe the mean things people said about Mr. Hank. Me too, sweetheart. Maya leaned down and kissed his forehead. Me too. She sat there for a moment longer, watching her son drift into peaceful sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand showed 9:42 p.m. In just over 12 hours, they would open the doors of Laces of Mercy Community Outfitters for the first time. Rising quietly, Maya padded to the window. She could see the store's sign from here, being tested for tomorrow's grand opening. The soft blue glow illuminated the sidewalk where just months ago chalk hatred had been scrawled. Now, fresh concrete stretched welcoming and clean before the newly painted door. Maya pressed her hands together, a gesture of quiet gratitude. The light from the sign seemed to wrap around her like a warm embrace, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Tomorrow would be a new beginning, not just for her and Jaden, but for the whole community. She moved to slip out of Jaden's room, but paused at the doorway, taking one last look at her sleeping son. His peaceful face in the dim light reminded her of everything they'd been through, everything they'd overcome. The fear, the uncertainty, the whispered judgments at work, all of it had led to this moment. The store's sign caught her eye again through the window, and Maya stepped outside onto their small balcony. The spring air was cool and fresh against her skin. Below, the Laces of Mercy sign glowed steadily, each letter a testament to persistence, truth, and the power of standing up for what's right. Maya clasped her hands together, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here. From counting her last dollars to becoming manager of a community foundation, from defending a misunderstood man to helping build something bigger than herself, it all felt surreal in the best possible way. The sign continued its test sequence, letters brightening and dimming in a gentle rhythm. Maya stood in the quiet night, her clasped hands held close to her heart, filled with silent gratitude for all the miracles, both large and small, that had brought them to this moment. Dawn broke over Main Street with a golden promise. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. The rebuilt storefront of Laces of Mercy Community Outfitters gleamed in the early light, its bright blue door standing proud against freshly painted white walls. By 8 o'clock, the sidewalks were already filling with people. Veterans in pressed uniforms gathered near the front, Eddie Morales among them, his silver hair catching the sunlight. The quilting circle, led by Darlene Price, arranged chairs for the elderly, their handmade quilts adding splashes of color to the scene. Children darted between adults' legs, their excitement electric. Maya stood at the corner, taking it all in. Her new navy blazer felt strange and formal, but Darlene had insisted a manager should look the part. Jaden fidgeted beside her in his Sunday best, one hand clutching 2 worn bootlaces that Hank had given him that morning. "Those are special, you know," Eddie had told Jaden earlier, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your Mr. Hank wore those through 2 tours in Vietnam, kept his boots on his feet through jungle and rain." Hank himself sat in a folding chair near the door, his cane across his lap. Though still weak from the hospital stay, his eyes were clear and bright. His sister Lena stood behind him, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, and for a moment Maya could see the young soldier he'd once been. The one who'd written that letter condemning hatred. The one who'd quietly helped so many. Pastor Ruth's arrival created a gentle stir. She moved through the crowd with grace, touching shoulders, offering quiet words of encouragement. When she reached the front, the murmur of conversations gradually stilled. "Let us bow our heads," Pastor Ruth began, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Lord, we gather today not just to open a store, but to celebrate the power of truth, mercy, and second chances. We thank you for bringing light from darkness, for showing us that what seems broken can be rebuilt stronger than before." Maya noticed Tessa in the crowd, her reporter's notebook tucked away for once, her head bowed like everyone else's. The woman who'd first posted that damaging photo now stood among those celebrating its fuller truth. "Bless this place," Pastor Ruth continued, "not just as a business, but as a reminder that every step matters, that mercy can wear many shoes, and that love can overcome fear. Amen." "Amen," the crowd echoed. Eddie stepped forward, scissors in hand. The red ribbon stretched across the doorway fluttered in the morning breeze. He cleared his throat, clearly fighting emotion. "Some of you know I served with Hank in Vietnam," Eddie's voice carried across the hushed crowd. "What you might not know is that he saved more than just my life over there. He taught me that courage isn't just about facing enemy fire, it's about facing yourself, facing truth, and standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Hank ducked his head, but Eddie continued. "This place isn't just about shoes. It's about walking a mile in someone else's boots before you judge them. It's about remembering that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and sometimes a little help taking their next step forward." Maya felt Jaden squeeze her hand as Eddie raised the scissors. The blades glinted in the sunlight, then closed with a decisive snip. The ribbon fluttered to the ground as applause erupted. Jaden stepped forward, his small face serious with the importance of his task. He held up the two bootlaces, worn, faded, but strong as the man who'd worn them. With careful concentration, he tied them into a bow, just as Maya had taught him months ago with his first pair of sneakers from Whitaker's. The crowd grew quiet, watching as Jaden carried the tied laces to the large glass jar by the register. It was labeled, "Laces of Mercy Fund," because every step matters. He dropped the bootlaces in, the soft thud echoing in the silence. Hank struggled to his feet, leaning on his cane. His voice was rough with emotion as he spoke. "Those laces walked through some dark places. Now they'll help others walk toward brighter ones." Jaden turned to the blue door, reaching up on tiptoes for the handle. The bell above jangled clear and sweet, a sound of welcome, of home, of hope, ringing in every ear. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Maya Lewis, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.